By the island.
That's beautiful.
Okay, yeah.
I need your opinion on
Gentlemen, we need to get started.
I don't know. But there's a section here that I have for biographies of the Golan. Okay. Somebody left a book here about Shlomo Kolbe. Would you put him in the Golan? Well, you're talking about the singer. Yeah, you're talking about the singer, not the Machia. So I would put him elsewhere. I wouldn't put him in elsewhere. Yeah.
What answer did you expect? What kind of answer did you expect?
I know, to put him next to a couple of Oh, good. Thomas, here is Myra McComas.
Oh, I'll just look for a minute. I'm not going to take it.
You can, it's a printout. The fourth item, I think, is the important one. And then the recipe.
Okay, I'm going to start the learning sponsors, a year of learning, Friends of Malaskotsky, Moshe Zelig ben Mordechai, Martin Lippman family, in memory of his wife, Malka Chana Bat Pinchas, Friends of Herb Jeremias, Tzvi Ben Zev, Friends of Sam Coleman, Shmuel Ben Yaakov, Friends of Gideon Lazinski, Mordechai Shlomo Ben Meir, Bella and David Adler, in memory of her father, Eliyahu Ben Yosef Kohen, those who were inspired by our Rebbetzin Emerita, Sheila Shapiro, Sarah Esther Malka Bat Mishom Yisachar, Gail and Leslie Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Mushka Shprinza Bat Yosef Chaim Vechava, Hanan Ben Moshe Eliezer Vechana, Pesha Bat Shmo Yitzchak Halevi Vitzipora, Isser Ben Yoel Moshe HaKohen Vechana, Rexford Friends of Gladys Sherman, Gutta Bat Meir, Michael Klein and Friends of Judah Klein, Yehuda Tzvi Ben Chaim, Marsha Bronner, in memory of her husband, Harav Yerachmiel Ben Shmuel. A month of learning by Rauven and Susan Podolsky, in memory of his father, Tzvi Ben Pinchas, by Charlie Gelfenstein, in memory of his mother, Dacia Gilabat Meir Halevi, also by Charlie Gelfenstein, in memory of his father, Meir Ben Yaakov. We have a week of learning by Susan Fuchter Kramer, in memory of her late husband, Harav Shmuel Aaron Ben Ephraim Fischel, as well as Marsha Federbush, in memory of her father, Menachem Mendel Ben Shlomo. Today is the 9th, 10th. Okay, they have a day of learning by Shirley and Marvin Weinstein, in memory of her mother, Sarah Lieber Bat Yeshaya Velfil. Amen. Shamas have an aliyah, crank Rafia Velti Yeshua Shamatluya, and Lachol B'nai Israel and Good Ben.
So this just something said in the Tzibur. This is what you brought me. Since I'm a kid, we always were unhappy with the Brisker methods. Why? Because I'll tell you why. And as a kid, I fought them because they solve problems by giving satisfaction without proof. In other words, I'll explain you. Let's say you have a problem. Okay, this is classic in Gemara learning. You'll see that's why you'll see a lot of guys love to give classes on the Rambam. Why? Because it's a free for all. Why? Because the Rambam is written without any sources. You never know. You never know what the Rambam is saying. So people will say, "Oh, they have a terrible problem." The Rambam. Then they'll give a solution. So everybody goes, "Oh, it's wonderful." But there are 50 other solutions. There are 100 other solutions. So when I was young, we were always on. The Torah of Briskers was brilliant. They understand all these people, but they generally you'll see the same problem over and over again, which is that they are proving things by giving satisfaction. Since you had a big problem and they can make you feel better, so that seems to demonstrate the truth, but it doesn't. Instead, solving a problem, it only proves your solution if there are no other solutions in the world. You understand what I'm saying? If there are 5 solutions, then you have to remove every other possible solution in the world in order to substantiate your conclusion. But to believe that something, remember, our whole goal is to know what God said. I have to paskin halacha. So you have to know what you can't be in doubt. You have to know exactly what you're saying. When I was quite young, there was a guy in Eretz Yisrael. He had been in America, but he was from New York. He was the nephew of the Berch Shmuel. His name was Chaim Zimmerman. That's all. He's known as a genius. He was a genius. So when I was a kid, I wrote him an essay, explaining why I was unhappy, and I love the Briscoe stuff. It's fantastic. I mean, it's so satisfying and so thrilling, So I wrote it, but I showed him that I took an article from the Rabbi Chaim, from all the Rambam, and I showed that the solutions are not substantiated by the text of the Gemara. I wrote a long essay to him. He sent me back only one message. He says it could be answered. But he never wrote me an answer.
Your essay.
He said it could be answered, but he never.
Because he wanted you to.
No, but it truly didn't. And all my life, I was always in these fights with them. Also, tells the same thing. Tells was another system which is so satisfying. The Torah of Shimon Shkop, for example, from Tells is extremely satisfying. You have to understand. When I say this, I'm not saying this in a God forbid a critical. It's wonderful, but to substantiate and say that this halacha you're going to paskin is a different story. There's a rabbi that's alive today who there's an essay. There's already the rabbi from New York, Roy Cohen, Rav David Cohen from Brooklyn. Cohen. Yeah. So he has there's an essay you can find which is hysterical. It's hysterically funny. I'll tell you what. First of all, it's funny because it was really an oral lecture, but I mean, but somebody transcribed it, so it wasn't really made to be a written essay. But it's hysterical because it starts out purporting to have an even-handed analysis of the way of the Rosh Yeshiva and the way of the person who has to paskin the halacha. Let's have an even-handed look at it. But of course, it's not at all. And after a while, he's absolutely trouncing them. And he says, "Listen," he says, "when you're in the yeshiva, he says you can say whatever you want. And you can have fancy footwork and all kinds of theories, etc." He says, "But when you got to paskin the halacha, there's none of that." And I mentioned here in this class several times. For example, on a diuk, remember I told you most diukim are bilti mukrachim. Most inferences are not necessarily true. They're not logically proven, and you can't paskin halacha on a diuk. You can't do it. You understand? Huh?
It depends on your audience. If a person is coming to you and say, "Can I use this pot? Did I make it treif?" You have to tell them yes or no.
Exactly.
But if you're teaching the halachas of how to kasher a pot and so
forth. No, but I meant to say something else. I'm saying on the basis of an inference. So inferences, which I'll discuss more frequently with you. Inferences are not mathematically sound. Only two types of inferences are sound. Most inferences don't work. You understand? Like, so for example, if let's say I say to you that here, I say that I'm going to prove to you that you have to get up early in the morning. Why? Because you see, it says, "Vayashkem Avram baboker." Avram got up early in the morning. He said, "Nah, get out. I have to get up early." It says, "Avram got up early. Avram gets up early. I don't have to get up early." All those points are not mathematically sound. Yes, and any inference that's based on words or word order is not sound. The only inferences that work are inferences that are on subjects or predicates of sentences, which are implicit. You don't have to really bother with them. Yes, they don't matter. So I'm trying to point out. I once saw Rabbi Goldberg, who was, I revered him. Rav Zalman Nechemia. He passed away. Rav Zalman Nechemia. He passed away 2 years ago. He was the Aviyad Dayanim in Eretz Yisrael. I went and I learned by him. It was the sweetest, the most wonderful thing in the world. I never saw anybody like him. I remember one time when I first came to him. So they always learned Choshen Mishpat there. But when I first arrived, they changed their system from 30, 40 years already. They learned 1 year. They learned Shabbos. So I remember. And he used to attract very good guys. I remember I was there, so somebody made a diuk on the Shulchan Aruch, the halacha. They'll say the language of the Shulchan Aruch really sounds like this. And I remember him; he's holding a little Gemara, small as this, like the little teeny Gemaras. Yeah, he's holding a little Gemara, and he's laughing. He's facing off all these guys. He says, "Listen," he says, maybe there are 6 ways to read this Gemara. You have the Ritva way, the Rashba way, this way. He names a list of Rishonim. You can learn according to each Rishon learns the Gemara. Different ways, okay, I grant you. He says none of those ways would yield this halacha. He says, so that's what it sounds like from the Shulchan Aruch. He said, ignore it. It makes no difference. He said, so you have to watch because again, diukim on words or word order. You understand the same thing, and proving a thing by the fact that it solves a problem does not demonstrate the truth of what you said. The fact that you can solve a problem here in science, we don't do that. In science, what do you do? What do scientists do? I love science because science is like an easy version of learning Torah. That's why I love science. Because in science, you have no responsibility. That's why I for my vacation, I always read science. You know, why is that? I said, why is that? For fun. Why is that? Because in science, I get to investigate the truth, but I have no responsibilities. You understand? In Torah, I have to find out what God said. It's very nerve-wracking. You understand? In Torah, you don't get to just have a good time. You have to find out what Hashem wants and do it. Right. You understand? In science, I have no obligations. I can whatever I get, it's good. What I don't get is also good.
And you make a pill and you kill people.
Yeah. I'm saying it doesn't make a difference. Whatever I do is fine. No, I'm saying I don't care. I have no responsibility in science. I don't have to do anything. Yeah, I have no obligations. Here I have no obligations to do mitzvahs. But yeah, no, I'm saying if I can't lie to me. I'm saying, but I have no responsibility towards. I have no moral responsibility to. I have no moral responsibility to. I have no moral responsibility to act upon to act. Yeah. I have no more responsibility.
You're not talking about the scientists. You're talking about you.
Yes, I have no responsibility.
Okay,
yeah,
fine. You're reading a novel. You may or may not solve the problem.
I have no responsibility to solve the problem.
If you know science, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Why is it that only water would basically make something chametz to rise, and another liquid wouldn't?
Well, first of all, I didn't say I'm a scientist or I know scientists. I said I like to read science. Yeah.
Instantly.
But we'll come.
It's not instantly like water, but
water is 18 minutes. But apple juice is instantly.
Yeah, we'll come. Let's get there. Oh, we passed it already, but we'll come back to chametz. It'll come up again. It'll come up again. Anyway, what I just want to say that if I already took the time, so you have to say there are two systems that you have to differentiate. There's a difference between a raya and a siyata. In other words, in proof, and when we discuss proof and logic, there are two types of proof. One type of proof is called a raya. One kind of proof is called a siyata. What is a siyata in the Gemara? It argues for the truth of this point, but it doesn't prove it airtight. That's called a siyata. Okay, a siyata, similar to what you might call an asmachta in rabbinic laws, but that's what it is. A real raya absolutely proves the point. So you have to be careful because often things are a siyata. They support your point. Understand they support the point, but they don't prove it in an airtight fashion. We Jewish people are responsible in the end to bring rayas. You're saying you have to have always an airtight point for what you're saying, because in the end, the whole function of Torah learning is to align ourselves with the will of God. You understand? Everything else doesn't matter. Not only don't I care about anybody, I don't care about my opinion. My opinion is meaningless. I only care about God. The only reason I express my opinion at all is because I need it as a tool to understand what God said. I would never express my opinion ever. Who cares what I say? The only thing is that since no human can learn without facing off their understanding against the Torah, so you have to have an opinion. In order to learn, you have to have an opinion. So you have to say something. If otherwise, I would never say anything. I would never say a word. I don't care what I think. I have no interest whatsoever. I want to know what the truth is. Who cares what I think? You understand? I want to know what God said. So but it just so happens that you cannot learn without thinking. So because you can't learn without thinking, you have to express ideas and thoughts. But so there are 2 points I say again. One, to understand that you cannot make a conclusion on the base of a non-conclusive inference is one, and two, you have to be very careful to separate between a support or an indication that something is true and a proof that actually airtight proves the point. And in the future, we'll have other opportunities. Okay.
The Gemara presents a position and says, but you can't really prove it, and it goes on and on.
Well, that's right. So, but in the end, when we want to pass an halacha, we have to know exactly what we're saying. As you know, for example, we had several times, even the time that I've been here in the Century Village. So you see, we have a proof that the Korah Techtei or other we give preference to the opinion that is lenient. Why? Because we like leniency? No, because the lenient opinion is airtight. Because in order to be stringent, you don't have to know you don't have to be sure what you're saying. If you're unsure, you can be stringent, but you cannot be lenient unless you're positive what you're saying is true. And that's why we give more strength to the one who's lenient because he knows what he's saying.
So, how many times in the Shulchan Aruch do you find the Shulchan Aruch says A and the Mishnah Berurah says B?
Yeah, all the time, dude. That's Yagos Torah. Everybody who learns Torah, everybody who's a mentor has a right to come to a conclusion. I can't bully anybody to follow my opinion. But I'm responsible to follow my opinion and listen to this. And listen to this. And listen to this. Listen to this. to such a degree, listen to this. Even the great Sanhedrin, listen to this, even the great Sanhedrin says that something, let's say in general, let's say the Sanhedrin poskin that something was permissible. They said this food was kosher. And a Jew, he's a good person. The great rabbi said that it's kosher, and he ate it. Who has to bring the sack? Whose responsibility is it that they made a mistake? It's the responsibility of the Sanhedrin. He relied on them. But if a person knows that the Sanhedrin is wrong, and he eats anyway what the Sanhedrin said was permissible, then he's responsible. You don't get to. It's not a politics game. It's a truth game. You understand?
Could we learn Gemara maybe?
Yeah,
well, tell me what you're gonna say.
I got work to do. Come to me with your stick on Yom Kippur.
Exactly. So you have to, but that's true. However, one second. Listen, I don't want anybody to worry. I'm aware of the time, and if I'm speaking to you, don't worry. Well, we'll finish in time. There's no problem. Don't worry. The answer is that also by the Sanhedrin, that's different. What you mentioned has to do with the authority of the Beis Din, and every person wants to. You have to understand the difference. If I came to the Sanhedrin and told them that I think they're wrong, and then they took a vote and they said that I'm wrong, then I could be killed for defying them. But so long as they haven't heard my opinion, I hold they're wrong, I'm not allowed to follow them. You understand what I'm saying? You're not allowed to follow them. Okay, just for the record. Okay, today we have a beautiful Gemara about, essentially, we have the same theme repeated many times. You know that when there's a lien on a piece of property, so when the property is sold, the lien continues to be, continues to be able, you can claw back from the buyer since you had a right to collect from the property. As long as you had that right before the property was sold, you have a right to claw back your lien on the property. So yesterday we said, listen, when we said that we're going to judge by the edis, by the best of the damager, we didn't know if that was only to preclude the damagee or it was to kick him up to his own standard. What do you mean to say? In other words, when we say it's not the damagee, but you followed what's the best of the world, even if the best of the world is less than the best of the damager, or we say no, that the Torah said it has to be the best of the damager. That was the question. When we left off, we didn't leave off. There's a statement. The Gemara says, listen, it's really self-evident that you have to say the other way. It's after Rosh Bar Abba asked the question. So Rabbi Abba said to him, Rahman Amar, see where you are on the bottom of yesterday. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the bottom. He says, Amar Le, or 6. Amar Le, he said to Rahman Amar Meitav, the Torah said you have to collect from the best. It says the Meitav said it's the best of his field. So it's self-evident that it's the best of the damager. However, the Gemara will still entertain both possibilities, that it's the best of the damager and the best of the damagee. Why? And I want to explain to you what's happened. It's a beautiful movement in the Gemara, which you'll see in a lot of places. Once we've exhausted our ability to prove something from the pasuk, we try and prove it from our oral tradition. That's also valid. We know that the rabbis who came before us knew what they were saying. And they were saying that we can do it. You'll see something beautiful. The Igros Moshe is the response of Rabbi Feinstein. So at one point, he wants to prove what is the explanation of the Shema. How do you translate Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad? You hear this? And at one point, you know what he brings to back himself up? You're going to be shocked. He quotes the Yiddish Taich in the Sinner from Europe. He quotes the Yiddish translation. He quotes the Yiddish translation of the Yiddish Sinner. Why? Because he knows that I'm not making it up. What I'm telling you, he quotes the Yiddish Taich from the Sinner. You know why? But it's clear why. Because he knows that sitter was in front of the eyes of the greatest rabbis of the previous generations. And if they let that sitter go, he said it was correct. He said it was correct. So then over here, we now I think it's wonderful. So now we go to our oral tradition. Same thing. I say what? That the rabbis who came before us, they knew. So let's see if I can prove the point from the brises. Let's say ACB, we learn. It says Ein lo ela idis. Okay, let's say a guy had an obligation to he had to pay all 3 debts. He had an obligation to pay a woman, a ksuva, he had an obligation to pay a balchov, the obligation to pay damages. So each of those are 3 different types of land. Okay, ein lo ela idis. Okay, now if he only has the best property, kulam gov min idis. So obviously everybody collects on the idis. Okay, why is that?
That's all he's got.
Okay, why? Because that's what he's got. Baininus, kulam go baininus. Let's say he only has baininus property, so everybody collects from baininus. Ziburis, and if he only has the worst property, kulam go mizuris, everybody collects. Ayulo idis baininus ziburis, but let's say he really has all three properties. So then, Nizakim behaviors, we know that the damagees are going to collect from the best. The creditor is going to collect from the middle. So as he should be divorced, and the woman who's collecting a super will collect from the worst. What happens if he has only idis ubaininus? Let's say he only has top quality and middle quality. So then what are you going to do now? So of course, Nizakim be this. So the damager is going to collect from the idis. That's his rule. The creditor who's supposed to get from medium property and the ksubasisha is supposed to get from the worst property, the baininus. The Baal Chov gets baininus because that's what he's supposed to get. The woman gets it because that's all he has. Okay, baininus with ziburis. Let's say a person has only medium property and the worst property. They're talking about Chov with baininus. So now it's going to come out interesting what? That the damagee who can't get his idis, he's going to get baininus, and the Baal Chov who's supposed to get baininus. And the woman who collecting a suba gets from the worst. Idis ziburis. If he only has like to the best and the worst and no middle category, what do you do now? He's not going to be this. So again, damages are going to get paid from the best because they have it. Okay. The Baal Chov and the ksubashisha is going to get the worst. Now here's the kasha of the Gemara. I'm going to show you something. How can you tell me what? He says, funny me, in the middle category, we learned in the Brisa, baininus ziburis, the person has middle ground and the worst ground. Nizakinu Baal Chov, he says, what happens? So the damager and the Baal Chov are going to get from baininus, and the Isha is going to get from ziburis. Now, one second. You could just told me what? That the creditor is collecting from where? The creditor is collecting from the middle, and the woman is collecting from the worst. If you're saying what? That you told me it always has to be according to the guy, like we just learned, like Rav Abba said. He said, "Bil Shalohin Shaman." We always consider the values of land according to him. So okay, it doesn't really make sense because since you're now going according to the standard of the world. So how is it that the creditor collects from what you just called the middle? Since all he has is middle and bottom, and you have to follow his. Well, his middle is really what? It's really the best. It's really the best, and therefore, and really the creditor should collect from the worst because otherwise the middle is the best. So it must be what that we calculate according to the world, and not according to the guy. Well, says no. He says you're wrong. He says says this is the case. Really, the truth is that we collect according to the guy. If that's true, so how can the Baal Chov is collecting from the baininus? The baininus is his idis. That's his best. The answer is I'll tell you why, because you're making a mistake. Because the consideration is not at the time of payment; it's at the time of the lien. You made a mistake. What happened was at the time of the loan, the borrower had best property and middle property and worst property. Worst property. But he sold the best property. So now, when the creditor wants to collect, even though you're right that at this moment, vis-a-vis the debtor, his middle category, what you're calling middle is really his best. But at the time of the loan, the middle really was what? The middle. The middle was the middle. So there's no reason to collect. The says what? The case is really what? Where he had the best and he sold it, but the original lien was on what's now called what's now. No, you can sell property. You can sell property as a lien. I'm allowed to sell property as a lien. No problem.
But you have to make it's called
that's a different story. But I'm allowed to. If I owe you money, you can't stop me from selling that property. Well, you'll get there when you want to collect. You'll get there. Whatever.
You have to give me first.
Everything depends on what the deal was. Everything depends on what the deal. I'm right. You don't because I owe you money. You don't control my property. Yeah. When I owe you money, you can't control my property. I do what I want to do. Now it says it makes sense to say that was the case. Since we had a machlokas and brises, we're going to use this as a way to demonstrate that our evaluation of this brisa was correct. We have another brisa that contradicts, at first glance, contradicts this brisa. Why? Okay, because it says baininus v'ziburis. Let's say the guy only had baininus v'ziburis, the same case, and here it contradicts and it says nizakim b'baininus. It says that the the damages collect from the middle. But now the creditor and the woman both collect from the worst. So it contradicted. The first Brisa said what? That the creditor collects from the middle, and the second Brisa said what? It collects from the worst. He says kashin adadi, so they're mutually contradictory. Allah Shlamino, you're forced to say what? Here is a case where what? The case where we said that the Baal Chov collects in the middle category is where he once had idis and he sold it. So the original lien was on what's now called what? The Baininus. Okay, and when the Brisa said when the Brisa said that the Baal Chov collects in the worst, it's not a case where the original lien was on the best. Okay, but rather what? This is the property he has now is the property he had when he took the loan, and therefore the Baal Chov really has to go down to where? The Baal Chov has to go down to the Ziburis. Now, so that's one answer. But now, watch what we're going to do. This is what I want to show you. We're reevaluating everything, not from the Psukim, but from the oral law. So everything's back in play. All the possibilities are back in play. Take a look. I'm going to show you. We're going to even re-entertain the possibility that we collect according to the world's best, and not according to his. Eboy saying, alternatively, here's another way to solve it. Because remember, our primary study of Torah is really the oral law, and this is something you have to know. When I was a kid, it was a different world. Well, probably when you were a kid, it was a different world than today. When I was growing up, so most almost the whole world wasn't religious, and they were having a hard time coming out of the Enlightenment time. They all were challenging the efficacy and the truth of the written law. They wanted to know if the Chumash was really divine. And as a kid, I was always in shock at these people, because the Chumash is what, if anything needed to be defended, it was the Chumash. The Gemara makes sense. That's the Chumash. The Chumash makes no sense. If I had that book without the oral law, I wouldn't even consider living by it. And the book is silly without the oral law. So I always used to be in shock that these grown-ups, when I was a kid, they want to see a defense of the Chumash. They want to see a defense of the oral law. They want to see a defense of the oral of the oral law. Pardon me, of the oral law. How do we? If I said backwards, I apologize. They want to. How do we know what the rabbi said? The oral law speaks for itself. It's the Chumash that's all the trouble. I was in shock always. But it seemed backwards what they were looking for. So the oral law is our most powerful connection to God. I don't mean that the Chumash. Ironically, even though the Chumash is word for word the word of God, but our easiest access to God is from the oral law. And that's why it says in the Gemara Brachas, you probably know, you learned it here, you learned already Brachas. So here, when the Gemara wants to know about the relationship of fear of God and humans and God, so the Gemara says, in Lagabi Moshe, that the fear of God is a small thing for Moshe. The Maharsha said, you know what it means? It means that Lagabi Moshe, once you fear the rabbis, it's easy to fear God. People who don't respect the rabbis will never serve God. It'll never happen. You know why? Because they make everything up. Because they're so full of themselves, they make up all the Torah for themselves. They don't listen to anybody. The rabbis are there to get in your face. That's why we have rabbis, and that's why you can't have the Balkari and the guy reading up by. We yell at the gabbai. We yell at the gabbai if there's two guys up there. You know why? Because there's no Torah without a Moshe. There's no Torah without a Moshe. We need human rabbis in there to get the Torah from God, because when you get it from humans who are like you, then you'll have fear of God. Yes, I'm dead serious what I'm saying. So the oral law is our number one connection, not the Chumash. Ironically, don't misunderstand me. Don't go out and say Rabbi Green doesn't respect the Chumash. It's the word of God. Every word. But the access to God is from the oral law. Oral law. That's how you get it. And the written law would be utterly meaningless without it. So now we're going to the oral law to prove this point. The Ibais alternative, watch. I could say both of the brises, both the brisa that says that the Baal Chov collects in the middle and the brisa that says he collects from the worst. They're both talking where that's the land that he had when he took the loan. Below Kasha, it's still not a contradiction. Why? Hard the Shavya Benin Shalok Kidis Talma. Here are the cases where the Baininus matches the best of the world, and therefore the Baal Chov collects from the worst. And you see what do we follow? We really, what's the determinant? It's not like we said before. It's following the best of the world and not the best, because we're going back and we're entertaining the possibility. But Khan, and over here, when the first price is said that the Baal Chov collects in the Baininus, lo shav ben shol kidis talma, his Baininus is not like the idis of the world. Therefore, the Baal Chov can really collect from the Baininus, because that's the Baininus of the world. So that we re-entertain the possibility that it's really following the world. Further, another possibility is like this. Here, his Baininus follows the world. It's a whole new rule. Mar Savar Bishloim Shamin. One opinion holds what that we follow him. Mar Savar Shamin. One follows one believes we follow the best of the world. Ravina says another way. But the Ula Pligi, it's really an entirely different argument between the prices. All these things are possible, and that's this. What is that? Because Ula, and we took this before as a given, but really there's room to argue. Ula says that from the Torah, every Balchov really collects from where? From the worst. What's the proof? The proof is from the Torah. Why? He says, Adamar Ula said, the Torah Balchov Bezibra. It's really the Balchov should collect from the worst. What's the proof? Because we learned, let's say you go to take a collateral from a guy who owes you money. You have to stand outside. You're not allowed to go into his house. You have to stand outside, let him go in and take what he wants. When a guy goes in by himself to take something to give you collateral, what's he going to give you the best? He's going to give you the worst junk he has. He's going to give you the worst he can. We say over here, the pasuk says what? He says, Shenemar, as the pasuk said, the chutz tamod, you have to stand outside. And the person that you are dunning, D-U-N, okay, that you're trying to collect from, okay, Yotzi Elecha es he brings the surety outside. What does a normal person bring outside? He's bringing out the cheapest thing he has. So if it's true from the Torah, since from the Torah I can prove that really a creditor only collects from the worst quality. So why do we custom ourselves that he collects in the middle? Why? So that because the rabbis did it. Why? I told you again, because you need oxygen. Loan money is the oxygen of the economy. So we want to encourage creditors to lend money and because their money. So really, what? It's really it's the Midrabani collects in the Beinus. Okay, but so Mar Islay Takanto. So the price that says that the Bachov collects in the Beinus because he holds that what Rapuna said is true, and that's what the rabbi said. Umar, the other Bryce, doesn't believe that it's true and says less late Takanto. He holds it's not true, and the rule was never changed, and the rule remains the Torah rule that a Bachov collects from the worst and doesn't collect from the best. So it's principle. So according to this, we had so many answers we did not conclusively conclude according to the Bryces. Okay, now let's say a guy owed three different things. He owed a woman, he owed a creditor, and he owed a damager. So okay, so you know that the three people, all of his land is each of those different types of land has a lien on it from each of the three obligations that he has. The best land has a lien to the damagee. The middle land has a lien to his creditor, and the worst land has a lien to his wife who was going to collect him. Now be very careful. We're going to have to analyze this. Be very careful. The Brisa says he then sold one guy all the three fields. Okay, at once. Okay, the echad he sold to everybody, the one guy at once. Oh well, no, I'm sorry. No, it doesn't say that at all. That's not correct. He sold to one guy. Okay, or alternatively, what the Brisa says, he sold it to one guy, or he sold it to three guys at once. That's what it says. He sold it to one guy, and it doesn't. No, that's exactly what. It's not correct. He sold it to one guy, and it doesn't say whether once or not. He sold it to one guy, or he sold it to three guys at once. In both of those cases, the buyer, everything stands just as it was in the original case, okay, and therefore what? So if the guy doesn't have any. So it's going to come out what? That whoever bought the worst land pays he has no money, the original guy. The guy who bought the worst land is going to pay the woman. The guy who bought the medium land is going to pay the creditor, and the guy who bought the best land is going to pay the.
From where do we learn out that the woman gets the worst?
Well, that's not the case here. We'll come to it. We're going to learn it. We'll talk. Yeah. Now. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, but we said, but if the three guys bought it not at once, when the three guys bought it at once, each one goes in front of the guy. But if they buy one after the other, then everybody buys. All the collections come from the last. Why is that? Because you have a rule. Remember, every time a person buys a piece of property, he has to protect himself. So what does he do? He figures he knows that there's a lien on the property. But if he buys property, as long as there's still property by the seller, that's enough to pay for the lien. He doesn't have to worry about himself. He's protected. So what happened over here was, if they bought all at once, each one enters in place of the original lien. But if they bought one after the other, everything slips down to whom? To the last buyer, because each guy slipped the lien over to that guy and said, I left free land. Okay,
As long as
low.
there's a large
Yes,
enough.
yes, ain low. But let's say what? Let's say the last guy doesn't have enough money. Let's say if you let me finish, you'll hear it. You'll come across here. Yeah, if you listen, you'll hear the answer. It says ain low. He says let's say that the last buyer's land is not enough to pay. Go then you have to go back and go to the second to last buyer. Ain low. Okay, and if the second to last buyer also can't cover it, go we go back now. Now, watch what the Gemara says. This is the point that we said before. When you told me that he sold it to one guy, you didn't tell me if he sold it to the one guy at once or he sold it to the one guy in 3 different days. So we don't know what the case is. Now watch. We're going to prove it for. When you told me the case that he sold it to one guy, and you told me what? That the one guy stands in place of the buyer, and the one guy's worst pays the woman, the one guy's middle pays the balchov, and the one guy's best pays the damager. Okay, says what's the echadami? What's the case? If you want to say that it's the same as the 3 guys and he bought it all at once, hashta, then it doesn't make any sense. Why would the rule be that he stands in place of the thing? The hashta l'shlosha. If you sold it to 3 guys in one day, the ikala meimar, okay, where we could have argued it, but we don't. The ikala meimar chad minayu kadim, and we could have said, listen, in one day, one guy could have bought it in the morning, one in the afternoon, one in the late afternoon. Nevertheless, and we really should there should be a claim that the last buyer assumes all responsibility. Nevertheless, and despite the fact that there really was a time gap between the 3, we ignore it and make it as if it happened at once. Okay, and they all stand in front of the violin in the place of each one respectively. If you tell me the case where he sold it to one guy was at once, he says, me buyer, do you have to teach me something? When one guy bought it in one shot, where there was no gap, okay, it's certainly true that he stands in place. In the case where the 3 guys bought it in one day, I could have argued that the halacha is wrong. I could have said, what? Whoever bought it the latest in the day is the one who has to assume responsibility. We don't say it for various reasons because we don't date a star by hours. We date a star by days. So the star only says 8th of Sivan, 8th of Sivan, 8th of Sivan. Okay, and even though they really one guy bought it last, and we don't put the lien down to the last guy for various reasons. We don't put it down. Certainly, one guy bought it one shot. We don't. So he said, "What? So you can't tell me what that when it says one guy bought it that he bought them all at once. You can't tell me that. Why? Because it's utterly obvious. Okay, so that can't be. Okay, so therefore, what alapshita? So you're forced to say what? That it's not the case where the one guy bought it all at once. This is what I told you before. It's not true. He says you have to say what? That even though it's in apposition with 3 guys buying on 3 days, and the one guy and the 3 guys have the same law. The one guy bought him what? The one guy bought it what? The one guy bought it after the one guy bought it in 3 days. Okay, and the 3 guys. The one guy bought it in the 3 days. And the 3 guys bought it at once. And the guy who bought it in 3 days has the same law as the 3 guys who bought it in 1 day. Why is it different? How come when the 3 guys bought it on 3 days, everybody's able to push it to the last? Everybody can say, each earlier buyer says, you can't collect from me because I left in the later buyer. I left land that the later buyer bought to pay for the obligation. Hanami. So why don't I say, well, one guy bought it in 3 days? He should also he should also say to each of the collectors, I left you room to collect, and you should also collect only from the last piece, and not from the last piece, and not from your respective original liens. Gemara says, don't worry, I can explain it. You know why that? You know why it's true. You know why the one guy who bought it on 3 days can't say it? I'll tell you why. Because he took the idis last, so he can't get out of it. That's the case, okay? Because he bought it last. So therefore, what? So everything slipped down to the
liens are all
on the last. Yeah, everything goes down to the last. Rav Sheshes could go pardon me. The idis was last. I'm sorry, I didn't say correctly. And therefore, what? And of course, he has a right to give each of the other guys. Remember, the idis slips down to the last. But he has a right to give each of the guys according to the original din. So he can pay. He can say this guy gets from Baininus, and this guy gets, so he doesn't know why, because he doesn't want it to go down to the Idis. He doesn't want to go down to the last one. He wants to pay. It's more pleasant for him to pay the last guy, the damager from the last one. But you're right. He could theoretically say it, but he doesn't want to push the Baal Chov to the Idis. He doesn't want to push the Ksubasisha to the Idis. He's going to pay each of them according to their rule. Gemara says, 1 second.
But he
One second.
all of it.
Gemara says, if that's really true, says he lesu kula believe me. He says, 1 second. But then everybody should collect from me this. How can you tell me that he has a right to push the Baal Chov to the Baininus and the Ksubasisha to the Zibris? Everybody should say, listen, I'm sorry, automatically, like I said to you before. Everybody should say, listen, automatically, as you bought each property, each lien, all three of them slipped down to what was left in the seller. The answer he says, I'll tell you why. And this you have to understand. It's right because he has what's called, he has a way to extort them. And what is that? He says, Mishum Damalu, he says, listen. He says, you're right. He says, theoretically, everything should have slipped down to the Yiddish. But you're going to take what I give you, or you're going to destroy you. Why? If you be quiet and you each accept, you the Ksuvas Isha, accept and you're being paid from the worst, and you the Baal Chov accept from medium property, Shaklisa, then you're going to collect. Okay, you'll get your money. The Elo, he says, but if not, he says, Madrana Shtar de Zibur Lamari. I'm going to give the worst property back. I'm going to give the star for the worst property I bought back to the original seller, okay? And all the liens are going to go back to who? Now there's free land by the guy who owes the money. And everybody's going to get the worst property. So he says, listen, either you take what I give you or you're stuck. I'm going to throw it back to the guy. Mar says, all right. So that's the real reason why he's able to force them to take according to the din. Mar says, 1 second. He says, if that's really true, okay, because he's able to force them, but it's zaken namini achi, then he should be able to extort even the guy who's supposed to collect from the best. Ella, okay, so he says, so you're right, that's not the point. The answer is like this. The answer is that the seller is dead. Here's what happened. And he only has his orphans left. Biasme, just the orphans are where. Well, the lavle pirninu. The reason why he can't say that to the best guy, because he really can't. It's a case where he cannot give back the shtar. Why is that? Because it won't do anything. He can't. It's a case where he can't extort them. You're right. If it was a case where he extort them, he could also extort the guy who has damages. He can't extort anybody because the seller died and his kids are there. Kids are not obligated to pay the debts of their father unless the father leaves them land. If the father left them land, then they're obligated to pay the debts of the father out of the land. But if the father left them even chattels, even if they be millionaires, they don't have to pay the father's debts. So now here's what happened. When you give back the land to the orphans, it does nothing. Why? Because that's newly acquired land. That's not land that they got back that they inherited from their father. So it's not going to, he has no threat. He can't say, sorry, you're going to have to collect from the orphans. They'll never collect from the orphans. So now if that's true, but then wait a second, then we're back in the hole again. So how come everything doesn't go down to last? How come they each have to collect according to the rule? Okay. So what the shibud is still what? It's going to still be upon the guy. Okay. He can't say it. He can't say it. Ella. Okay. What? So therefore what? So now what's the reason why he can say each guy has to collect? We can't. Okay. We can't say what because of extortion, because then he should be able to extort the guy who's collecting for damages. Elamai, what we have to say what it's with his orphans and there's no extortion at all, no ability to extort. Ella mishum da'amalu. Here's what he says. He says, and this is a famous principle, and we're going to use it again and again and again. When the rabbis give somebody a special privilege, when the rabbis make the rabbis have two tools that they do. One is called gezeros, and one are called takanas. Gezeros are what you're most familiar with rabbinic laws. They're called those are decrees, those are fences that they make. The rabbis will extend a prohibition in order to protect the Torah law. So they'll make a fail-safe to protect it. The second things that the rabbis do are called takanas. Takanos are enactments of the rabbis, and they are made for what we call tikkun olam. Not like these bums that say tikkun olam for them is all like acting like goyim. The tikkun olam and the Gemara means that the rabbis enact things to make society function well. Like I told you, for example, here, if a kid finds a lost object, why does it go to the father? Why does it go to the father? The kid, they think about to get peanut butter. He can't have his lost object. The answer is, since we obligate the father to support him, and we want fathers to be to be gracious with their children. Understand? If the father would feel that if the kid finds an object and it belongs to the kid, the father says, "What am I? I'm a nobody. I support the kid, and he has a windfall, and I'm out." So the rabbis, in order to make sure that there's always a gracious feeling between the father and the kid, they put the lost object over to their father. The rabbi saw that there's certain things that we do in order to have a good functioning world. We try to make psharas, for example, and based, and we don't want people to even when a guy's right, we prefer him not to go down to the letter of the law and collect his money. Why do we try to make psharas? What's wrong? We don't know the law. But people didn't know the law. People who split money because they didn't know the called Dayanei the Chatzatza. They're Amei Aretz. They were the ignoramuses. They're ignoramuses. Why do we make up shar? Well, you don't know the law. You know the law. Award the money to the guy who owns it. Why are you making compromises? The answer, we make compromises because people have to live with each other. If you have a business, you have a business fight with your next door neighbor. No, you're right, and you're right. The money's yours. You have to go to shul with the guy the next morning. You have to sit next to the guy in shul. What do you want the rest of your life? You're going to be growling and grousing. So we try to make up sure. Oh, we're not going to take away the money from the guy who deserves it. Okay, we'll make a little compromise, a little bit. Give the guy a break. Give the guy a break. You have to live with people. You say walk away. Yeah. So he's not okay. He lost. We have to be. He has to be. Yeah. He doesn't have to be utterly trounced. He has to be trounced. He has to be nullified. We don't want it. So the rabbis have ways. We want it to be a good feeling in the society. We want to be good vibes. We want to be good vibes between people. So therefore, what? So we said, well, okay. He says, okay. What's the whole reason why? The rabbis made what's the reason why, for example, that what's the reason? Time of my why is it okay that we never collect from the property that has a lien on it, so long as there's free property? It's all there to benefit the buyer. We want people to be able to buy stuff and not be crazy. They're never gonna know what's going to hit them. Says what? He says what? The rabbis made the lien slip back, okay, off the land, back to the original seller. Why? For my benefit. Okay, why is that? So that I should know I can buy a thing with a clear mind and not and I know that I left free property. I'm not going to be collected from. But in this case, I don't want it. It was made for my benefit, but if it doesn't benefit me now, you can't force me to take what you make for my benefit when it's not for my benefit. What's the classic example? This rabbinic law. The rabbis made a rule. That what? That if a woman, they want the husband is going to support the wife. She doesn't have enough money. Okay, but and since he has to support her, he gets her salary. Okay, if she's going to go to work, he's going to get the salary. Why does he get her salary? Because they want him to feel good when he's supporting her. He doesn't want to be grouchy and feel like she makes money, he's got to support her. Here, he gets her salary, he feels good about it. But anyway, the Rabbah, like Rabbah said, the Amar Rabbah says, anytime a person says, I don't want the rabbinic decree, Kagonzu, for example, a woman, Shamino, we listen to them. My Kagonzu, what was the case? The case I'm telling you, Rav Huna, like Rav Huna said that what? A woman can say to her husband, slow down. I don't want you to get my salary. Thank you very much. He says, don't support me, and I'll keep my salary. Thank you very much. Well, the takana was made for me to support me. I don't want your support. It's not benefiting me. The same way he says, listen, you know why the lien slips off the land that I bought back to the land of the seller? To benefit me so that I can buy free and clear. Thank you very much. I don't want it. When I was a kid, there was it used to be different in bookstores today are just like grocery stores, but when I was a kid, booksellers in Eretz Yisrael were booksellers. They were book traders. They traded books. People made good deals, so they used to buy it all. One store would sell a book for half the price of another store. Not like today. It's like a grocery store. They all get from the wholesale, and it's all retail. But in those days, every guy had different prices because they traded books. So there was an old guy named Stitzberg when I was a kid. It was one of the famous bookstores in Yerushalayim. It was a teeny little shop that had books up to the ceiling, So I bought a book by him once, and then I found out. I was an innocent kid. I was 20, and I found out that the shop down the street was selling it for almost 3 times the price. So I thought maybe I'm cheating the guy. You know what I mean? I'm maybe cheating the guy. So I come back. He's an old man. I'm a young kid. I'm a little kid. So I come in there. I said, Mr. Stitzberg. I said, I looked after I bought this book from you. For whatever it was for like 3 liras, I found out it's selling for 9 liras down the street. So he looks at me like this, like, wait a minute, is he trying to hustle me? He's looking, who's coming back to give me back money? He's over here. What are you, hustling me? He looks at me, says, Ani Michael. He says, I forgive you. He says, whatever it is. He looked at me first like, who's you trying to kid me over here with this? Ani Michael. So he says, I don't want it. Thank you very much. I don't want the benefit. Okay, good. So we're done. So now we've explained why it is that why it is that the right that why it doesn't go back.
No, it does go
why it doesn't go back. Yeah, why it doesn't go back. Now we have a problem. We already said that if a guy had three types of payment, okay, so each one goes to its respective land. Okay, why? Because why? And what's the reason? We just said because he says I don't want it to go back to the original guy. I want each one to stay. I don't want it to go to the latest purchase. I want each one to stay where they are. Because going to the latest purchase was only to my benefit. I don't want the benefit. Now we're going to say what's the case where after I bought it, after the second guy bought it, after the buyer bought it, he sold it to somebody else. Now what happens? What happens vis-a-vis the third guy? Okay, but there was the original owner, the buyer, and Mr. Number 2, and Mr. Number 3, buyer number 2 sold to number 3. Pshita, he says this part's obvious. Let's say the buyer who bought all 3 lands, with all three liens, okay, no, and he bought all 3 lands with all three liens, okay, and he sold the middle and the worst to another person. He bought all 3, and he sold the bottom 2 to somebody else. And he kept the best. Now it's obvious. Everybody's going to have to come and buy from the Idis because why? Because that was the last thing around. Okay, because that's the one that he bought. That's the one that he bought last. Okay, now, okay, and everything else. Okay, and nobody has to pay. Beinus v'ziburis. Okay, and now what? As far as the beinus v'ziburis, let's think about it. He doesn't have it. The matzi lememelu, so he can say to him the lonichle v'tach the rabbanon. And since he doesn't have the middle and the worst to say, I don't want the takana of the rabbis, I don't want it to go to the best, okay, because he doesn't have many more. When can he say what collect from the worst in the middle when he still has it to give to them? But since he doesn't, he can't say, I don't want you to go to the takana. Avo, let's say like this. Mochar idis, okay, the best property that he bought last, he sold. Bashir Zibris, okay, Benus Zibris. He kept the middle and the bottom. So what he bought last, he sold to somebody else, and he has the bottom too. Now, what's the law? Should they all collect from the best, which is now by Mr. Number 3 who bought it, because that was where everything came in the end, okay? Because it was free when originally when the buyer bought the bottom 2, or not. Sabra by Lemematu. So buyer thought to say, you know what, you're right. They're all going to collect from the Idis. Why is that? Because at the time when he bought the middle and the bottom and the middle and the bottom, the Idis was free. So it's going to go. The third guy's stuck. The third guy's stuck. Amalei Rav said to him, he said it's not true. He says you're making a mistake. And why is that? You cannot mess up the second buyer. When the first guy, when one guy sells to another, he sells all of his rights to the guy. Okay, since in the case like we learned before, had it been the case of the first buyer who had all 3, he always has a right to say to them what? He says, you're going to have to collect from the worst, you the woman, you the creditor collect from the middle. Even though he bought the best last, and theoretically it all should have slipped down to the last. Why? But what? Okay. And even though what you can't collect from lien property when it's free, and everything should go down to the best. You can say like we said before. He says, listen, I don't want that decree, which was originally made for my benefit, which is not going to benefit me now. Okay, also the second buyer who's now stuck with the last free property with the Idis, he says, what? Nami Matziyamali can say to him, Gabi Benis Viziris, I'm sorry, you still have to go back to number 2 and take from the middle and the bottom. Why? Because when the second buyer, okay, bought what he bought, he bought the best property having in mind it has all the rights that the original buyer had. That's the point. So even though he really doesn't have all 3 properties, he only has the one, but when he bought the best, he bought all the rights that the buyer had, that the Mr. Number 2 that he sold it to him. Amar Rabba says, Reuben shemachar kostos of the Shimon. Reuben sold everything. Okay, he had all of his fields. He had debts. The first guy, Reuben, who was a debtor, sold all of his fields that had liens on them the second guy. Shimon, who bought it, sold one field, okay, of the medium property to another third property to Reuven. Okay, so now what's left for me in the hand of the original Shimon who bought it? Shimon bought from Reuven 3 types, and he sold to Levi. He sold to Levi the middle type, okay, and he only has the best and the worst. The Reuven, and now the original seller's creditor came. What's the rule? Rotzmi Zegova, he has a right to collect from number 2, and he has a right to collect from number 3. He can do whatever he wants. If he wants to collect from the medium property that's in the hands of number 3, he can collect. And number 3 can't say to him, listen, you should go to number 2 who still has some medium property, okay? Okay, because why? Because okay, why? Because because every creditor has a right always to collect from middle property. And if he wants, he can collect from number 2. Okay, who bought everything?
Why shouldn't you want only Edis?
Pardon me?
Why shouldn't you want only Edis? Why shouldn't you put
No, he's a balchov. He's a balchov. He's a creditor. He only gets middle property. Let me say. I'm going to say correctly. I don't know if I say correctly. If he wants to collect from the third guy who has the middle property, he's allowed to collect it, and he can't stop him. Okay, and push him to the bad property that's in the hand of number 2. Okay, why? Because he said to him, listen, you bought my lien, okay, and my lien is always a middle property. You can't get rid of me. Okay, and if he wants, he can even go back to number 2 and collect from the worst property, okay, even though he doesn't have any middle property. And number 2 can't stop him and make him go to the middle property by number 3. Why? Because the creditor says to him, he says, because when you bought all the property from the original debtor, you came in place of the debtor, and I always have a right to collect from you. But when did I say such a thing? When he sold middle property. Let's say number 2 sold the best and the worst and maintained the middle property. Then the creditor, okay, cannot collect from number 2. Because number 2 is going to say to him, that's why I was careful and I sold Edis Viziburis. Okay, that's why I sold. Pardon me. That's why I bought. I'm sorry. He says. That's why he says, probably number 3 says what? He says, that's why I bought specifically what? The best and the worst are the Chazilach. I bought land that wasn't fit for you. Okay. And not only that, Vafilu Zovan, even if number 3 bought middle property, no Amran, even that case, when did I say what? That you can collect from him? El de Loshir, okay, Benes the Kabase. It's only when he didn't leave number 2 some middle property like it. The Lamatzi Amali, where you can't say I left you middle property by number 2. Avol Shir Benes the Kabase, Gabi Shimon, but if you left middle property by Shimon, Lo Gabi, okay, Lo Gabi Mine, then he cannot collect from him. Why? Because he has right to say to him, and number 3 can say, I left you place by number 2 to collect. And this is a good stopping point. We'll continue on Shabbos. Everyone have a wonderful Shabbos.
Is this what Moshe learned up there for 40 days?
Where'd you hear that? I spoke to you. Only a fraction of it.
How do you know what a buyer is going to say? Because it happened hundreds, thousands of years.
So I'm going to tell you something. If you haven't been, I'll tell you something interesting. Are you familiar with the story of Eldad Hadani?
What?
Eldad Hadani. Eldad Hadani. It's mentioned that you haven't met. Yeah, we have. So Eldad was in the time of the Gonim. The time of the Gonim. You know, the Medrash tells us that the tribe of Dan, Yerav ben Nevat, they were the best fighters amongst the Jews, and Yerav ben Nevat wanted to utilize them against the other Jews. He wanted to recruit the tribe of Dan to fight the other Jews. So the tribe of Dan was so I don't know what the verb is. The noun consternation. What's the verb? Are you consterned or consternated? Anyway, I don't know. But the tribe of Dan was so upset. Yeah, was so. No, I wonder what the verb is. They're concerned or consternated. But the tribe of Dan was very upset. So they begged Hashem. So Hashem brought a big wind, and He carried them away to Cush, and they were isolated from all the other Jews. By the time the Gonim, the Jews found 2 Jews being auctioned as slaves, and so they immediately redeemed them. And one of them was a guy named Eldad, and he claimed that he was from the tribe of Dan. Okay, he had been isolated all these years, and they found that he knew he knew a tremendous amount of Torah, and he spoke Hebrew a little differently than them. You understand? And he has the tradition going all the way back, to all the way back to Tanakh times.
Right.
So they had a big problem because his definitions of the psuls of Shechita were different than theirs. So they wrote to I think Rav Yaakov Tzemach Gaon, what do we do? What are we going to do about this guy? And they woke the guy in the middle of the night, to try and surprise him. They saw he was consistent in his Hebrew, so they didn't know what to do. So Rav Yaakov Tzemach Gaon wrote back. He said, "It's fine." He says, "Continue with your tradition." He says, "You don't have to say the guy's a fraud." He says, "There's what to support the story. They have what the Medrash, there's plenty in the Medrash to support his story." He says, "But you have to consider just like Bavli and Yerushalmi, continue the laws of Shechita the way you know them, and you can ignore it because it's like Bavli and Yerushalmi. You don't have to worry about it." But what I want to tell you was, I didn't get to the point that you asked me. When his Mishnayos, all of his Mishnayos said the following. Every Mishnah said Moshe said to Yoshua in the name of Hashem. Every Mishnah said Moshe said to Yeshua.
And they didn't have them.
Every Mishnah said Moshe said to Yeshua in the name of Hashem.
But what you said before was that the Gemara basically is the real thing that shows you about the religion. The Torah actually has to be written by Hashem because there are a lot of things in there that no person.
We're not communicating. We all agree. Don't go ahead and say we're agreeing denigrating the Torah. We know the Torah is the word.